I'm Matt Bishar with NAREIT.com here in Washington, D.C. at the Marriott Marquis for the 2016 NAREIT REITWise Law, Accounting, and Finance Conference. Joining me today is David Polster, partner with Skadden Arps. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I want to talk today about the impact of FIRPTA reform on the real estate market. But first, can you start by giving us a brief overview of the changes that were made to the FIRPTA rules as part of the PATH Act?
There were basically four provisions that were changed in FIRPTA as a result of the PATH Act. The first one was an expansion of the publicly traded exception. There's always been an exception in the FIRPTA rules for the ownership of less than 5% of publicly traded stock. That 5% exemption was expanded to cover up to 10%. So effectively doubling the amount of investment that a foreign person could make in a U.S. publicly traded REIT without being subject to the negative FIRPTA consequences. In addition, as part of that 5 to 10 expansion, there was also the inclusion of what are called qualified shareholders, which picks up certain collective investment vehicles that invest in REITs where the public is one layer removed. The public invests in a publicly traded collective investment vehicle which invests in a REIT. And for the first time, picks up those investors, those small public investors in the FIRPTA exemption. The second major provision is the exemption for qualified foreign pension funds. And this is something totally new that had not existed before and really opens up FIRPTA to those qualifying investors. The other two changes, one of them is to create a set of presumptions for what qualifies as a domestically controlled REIT. Domestically controlled REITs, the stock of domestically controlled REITs is not considered a FIRPTA stock, and for the first time there are now some rules surrounding how you calculate domestic control for public companies that don't really know who all their shareholders are. And then finally, there were some changes made to what's called the cleansing rule to deal with some concerns that the government had about potential abuse of those cleansing rule provisions in the context of REITs.
And what provisions do you think will have the greatest impact on the REIT industry?
I think the first two provisions that I mentioned are really the game changer provisions, because those are the provisions that are really going to impact the amount of non-U.S. foreign investment in U.S. real estate. The pension fund provision allows qualified foreign pensions to invest without being subject to FIRPTA, and that for them, the people that are qualified for that, is really a game changer, and they are already ramping up and investing and working on investments to take advantage of that rule. And the 5 to 10, even though that's a provision that's been around for a long time, it just increases the dollar amounts that can be invested without being subject to FIRPTA.
So these changes to FIRPTA were a long time coming. Now that sort of the door has been open to changing FIRPTA, do you expect to see additional changes in the near future?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that the long process of FIRPTA reform did is it caused a lot of people, both in Congress and out of Congress, to focus once again on the FIRPTA rules. And when one focuses on the FIRPTA rules and thinks about it, you don't really like what you see. The FIRPTA provisions in general are not really great tax policy. They're provisions that don't really raise a lot of revenue, but create a lot of impediment to foreign investment and a lot of complexity that really just increases transaction costs for people doing it. There are ways, for people to invest without being subject to the draconian FIRPTA provisions, but it just takes a lot of effort and it limits their flexibility and makes it unattractive. So one of the things that's now being talked about is another attempt. There have been several over the years since FIRPTA has been enacted, but another attempt at full repeal of the provision. How that goes and where it goes is probably caught up in the broader context of international tax reform, but that is something that I think people have started to talk about as they focused on the FIRPTA provisions through this process.
David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For more from REITWise 2016, be sure to visit REIT.com.